Morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the April 3rd, 2024 meeting of the North Carolina State Board of Education. I'm Eric Davis, Chair of the Board, and I call this meeting to order. Delighted to welcome board members and advisors, staff, on-site visitors, online listeners, and social media followers. Please note that you can follow the State Board of Education on its social media platforms at edstateboard_NC. And you can follow the meeting online and see all of our materials by going to SBE meetings at www.dpi.nc.gov. The idea that ultimately became public education was one of the greatest in our nation's history. It took a system of privatized schooling that reached a very small minority of youth, mainly the privileged, and ensured that our democracy could grow and prosper by putting access to knowledge and opportunity within the grasp of many. Did we get it all right? Well, of course not. Our nation's history is filled with both progress and regression, in including all races, genders, and classes of people in the national ideal that all are created equal. And from having access to the abundance of opportunity that this great nation offers. And we struggle today to right the course, to continue to provide access to education for all, to live up to our national ideal of all created equal. Well, we all win when we embrace and strive to obtain that ideal. Yet never has there been an institution with more promise to fulfill the aspiration of producing an educated and prosperous society than our system of public schools. Every day, teachers across this state, in countless ways, large and small, change our students' lives by caring for them, sharing knowledge and life lessons, and showing our students how much we believe in them. The task before us is to support our teachers and to improve this great institution, dramatically perhaps. But the task is not to quit, not to divide us, not to pit us against each other. We must never give up, as some may want to do, on public schools. That's a choice that we all have every day, especially as voters in this upcoming election. And what you will see from this board and the hardworking staff in this agency is the continued resolve to protect public education, to serve our public schools, and to educate each and every child in our state. You'll see this mission reflected in today's agenda, as well as on full display when we meet in Boone next month for our biannual planning and work session. Today, we continue to look at school turnaround, preparing and supporting, as well as retaining a highly effective educator workforce, and key human capital resources that our state must provide to support districts and charter schools across our state. I believe in our teachers and the terrific work that they do every day. I believe in our students and their families and the communities that they come from. I believe in their public schools because public schools matter. I'll not give up on public education. I'll never stop trying to make it better for the students of our state. And I hope that you'll join me and this board in this mission and this commitment. Continuing grateful for this month, as I am every month, to welcome so many local superintendents who live this mission and commitment every day. This month it includes Dr. Ethan Linker of Pitt County Schools, Dr. John Stover of Rockingham County Schools, Dr. Brad Rice of Stokes County Schools, who will be with us either today or tomorrow. And if you would, please join me in thanking them and their colleagues across this state who are leading districts and schools for the betterment of our students' education. Superintendents, we look forward to sharing this work with you and eager to engage in ongoing conversations on how we can be of service to you in your efforts to make good on the right to a sound basic education for every student in your public schools. For our visitors and those listening online, today's agenda involves our board discussions on these agenda items, and tomorrow's agenda is the official meeting when the board will vote on its action agenda. Board members are reminded that it's our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this board. Does any member of the board know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record. If during the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating and in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. Board members, you received the agenda last week, had the opportunity to review it, ask if there are any requests for changes to the agenda. Hearing none, I request a motion to approve the April 3rd and 4th, 2024 agenda of the North Carolina State Board of Education.
So moved, Treasurer Falwell.
Motion by the treasurer. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Keenan. Mr. Fafaria?
Dr. Oxendine? Ms. Kamnitz?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers? Mr. Blackburn?
Yes.
Ms. Moore?
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell?
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor Robinson? Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes. Motion carries. We have an agenda. And we'll begin today with the Education, Innovation, and Charter Schools Committee led by Mr. John Blackburn. Mr. Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am John Blackburn. I chair Education, Innovation, and Charter School Committee, and I'm joined in this work by my friend, Ms. Jill Kamnitz. Before I begin my official business, I wanted to just thank you, Chair Davis, for your comments. They were very appropriate and very much appreciated. Thank you. First order of business on our committee is Charter School Review Board update. Hello, and Ms. Picaro.
Hello. Good morning, everyone. Ashley Beccaro from the Office of Charter Schools. We had our March Charter Board meeting on March 11th. Our April meeting takes place this upcoming Monday. At the March meeting, we had one renewal vote that had been pending. Ridgeview Charter School, which is located in Gaston County. That school received a unanimous decision to not renew its charter effective at the end of this school year. The school did appeal to this board. A panel heard that appeal yesterday, and I believe shortly you'll hear more information about that. So we have two remaining schools for a renewal vote coming up in April on this Monday, Children's Village Academy and Movement Charter School Eastland. Those two will both receive a vote, and then if either of those schools appeal, it would be brought to your board. We also had 8 low-performing schools present to the charter board regarding their school improvement efforts. This is an ongoing thing we have in front of the charter board for low-performing schools, just to kind of touch base with the charter board to get a presentation and an update on how their school improvement plans are progressing. We also had amendment requests. So if a school, a charter application or a charter school would like to change anything in relation to its charter application, it has to go through an amendment process, which requires approval by the board. And we had 2 schools request to delay their opening to 2025. We originally had 12 charter schools slated to open this upcoming fall. We are now down to 5, with 2 of those, I believe, requesting delays on Monday. So best case scenario, we will have 3 schools opening in the fall. We also heard a discussion about the charter renewal policy, which you will hear also shortly. We had an update on the ready to open process and some administrative details, including calendar changes for the board. And Mr. Friend, Chair Friend is here as well if there are any specific questions related to last month's meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Friend, for coming. Do any of my board members have any questions? Thank you very much. Thank you. So our next,
John,
yes,
with Mr. Friend being here and the process of reviewing schools and process, I think I'd like to at least understand, not the specifics of every school, what the process is that the or is engaging in, be helpful information to understand.
Did you hear?
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for having me here today. Actually, for that question, I'll probably turn it over to Ashley because she's the one and her staff at the at the Office of Charter Schools actually do the work each week, each month in terms of the process that schools go through during the renewal, in terms of what the cycle is, the meetings that they have during that renewal process before they ever get to the CSRB. So I don't know if you want to give a Cliff Notes overview
Sure,
of that
I
whole
will
process, because it's
also-
pretty intense in terms of what schools are required to go
I
through.
will
And to be
also
clear,
cover
the
it in
question
policy.
was not about renewal, it was about you were reviewing some schools that I understood were not up for renewal.
Oh, the
Oh,
low performing
okay.
schools?
Yes, that's what the.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood the
Just wanted to
question.
understand that process. I hadn't heard about that one before.
Yeah, anytime a school is deemed low performing or continuing low performing, they're required to come before the CSRB and give us an update on what their strategies are that they're working on to change that status to improve the academic performance of their school. It's not uncommon for some schools to have them come even before us on more than one occasion if we have continual questions about what are they doing to get themselves out of that status of low performing or continuing low performing. So last month we heard from I think 8 schools, and they presented, the head of school and board members present to us again what is it that they're doing to hopefully turn the tide in terms of academic performance. I don't know if you have anything to add to that. Do we have any more to list coming this cycle?
No, we've concluded that for this year, as schools kind of enter test prep and testing mode. But during the summer, the Office of Charter Schools kind of evaluates what low-performing schools we have, and then has a kind of like a risk analysis in terms of which ones we feel like need to have either site visits or come before the board, and kind of make our decisions based on that process over the summer so that we can start immediately in the fall.
Mr. Chairman, this is Treasurer. Just a quick question.
Go ahead.
Hello?
Go ahead. Go ahead, Treasurer.
Thank you. Ashley and others, could you just add 4 boxes to your process that can easily be checked, especially when it relates to charter schools no longer being charter schools and losing their charter? One is, box 1, are they participants in the state pension system? Box 2, are they participants in the state health plan? Box 3, do they owe money to the Division of Employment Security because of unemployment taxes that they're supposed to be owing to the state coffers? And number 4, do they owe any money to the DPI? And just these are 4 simple financial check in the box questions that I think the board and myself would be interested in knowing the answers to, especially as it relates to schools that are maybe dissolving. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. We do cover some of that in the closure process, so we will make sure to add some of the final 2 ones you mentioned.
Yeah, and follow up, my experience is that they're several steps ahead of us on these processes, and they find a way to do things with money before we're able to get what we're all owed. And so thank you for listening.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Treasurer.
And one quick follow-up, you made reference a moment ago in describing that process to making a decision over the summer about which schools to refer to the board. I just want for clarity, you're talking about referring to the Charter School Review Board or the state board?
The Charter Schools Review Board for presentations.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. Our next item is appeal from the Charter School Review Board. Yesterday, April 2nd, I chaired a hearing panel of the EICS committee. The panel included state board members Wendell Hall, Jill Kamnitz, and myself. We convened to hear an appeal from the March 11th, 2024 decision by the Charter School Review Board not to renew the charter of Ridgeview Charter School in Gaston County. The panel heard oral presentation from representatives of the Charter School Review Board. Ms. Picaro did that. and the Ridgeview Charter School and considered many documents that have been presented to the panel by both parties. Those documents are in your board materials for your review and consideration as you make the final decision about whether Ridgeview should be closed. Following the presentation, the appeal panel voted unanimously to recommend to the full State Board of Education that it uphold the March 11th, 2024 decision of the Charter Schools Review Board to deny the Ridgeview Charter Schools request to renew its charter, which ends on June 30th, 2024, and to adopt the proposed findings of fact submitted by the Office of Charter Schools on behalf of the Review Board as the basis for the panel's recommendation. Those proposed findings of fact are included in your materials, so I will not read them aloud. I do want to summarize for you the most relevant facts included in that document that are the basis for the panel's recommended decision. The Charter Review Board's non-renewal decision and the appeal panel's non-renewal recommendation is based upon two things: extremely and consistently low academic performance by Ridgeview students, failure of the governing board that holds the charter to oversee the administration of the school, to participate in governance activities, and to take proactive and necessary steps to ensure that students were receiving the education to which they are constitutionally entitled. Academic performance. The record demonstrates that Ridgeview Charter School has not met the academic standards required for charter renewal. Specifically, the school has failed to meet the requirements for student performance contained in the school's charter. It is continually a low-performing school and has been a low-performing school for all of its years of operation that have been tested. The school's academic performance for the years tested in June of 2022 and 2023, which were extremely low. In 2022, only 13.2% of the students tested as proficient. In 2023, only 13.8% of the students tested proficient. This means that over 85% of the students at the school are consistently below grade level with no significant improvement demonstrated. This is 35.2% and 36.4% lower than the test scores in the same years for students in the Gaston County School District, where Ridgeview is located. According to information shared by the Office of Charter Schools at the hearing, this gap is still extremely wide even when comparing the students at Ridgeview to similar students in the cohorts in Gaston County schools. Further, the school has not met academic growth requirements for any of its tested years since it opened. This means that the Ridgeview students who are already behind are not gaining a year of education for each year spent at Ridgeview. In other words, they're falling farther behind each year. Governance. The documentation in the record makes it clear that Ridgeview's governing board has not actively and consistently participated in the school's quest for renewal. Despite strong encouragement by OCS staff and members of the Charter Schools Review Board, and in the face of a non-renewal recommendation, few of the board members attended or participated in mandatory meetings with the Office of Charter Schools or the Charter School Review Board. Further, no real efforts appear to have been made by the Ridgeview Board or staff until the appeal meeting yesterday to demonstrate a plan for improving the student performance at the school. Unfortunately, the plans presented yesterday came too late and only after many opportunities passed without action. In conclusion, while the panel and I personally believe that the Ridgeview Board and staff care for the students deeply, academic achievement does not appear to have been a priority. This has been to the significant detriment of the students. The panel did not feel that it could recommend renewal when it is clear that the school does not have the personnel and programs in place to move the students forward academically. Even if it were to make significant and necessary changes, it would be several years before the school could be in a position to help students make progress. We did not feel that we could, in good conscience and consistent with our duty to ensure that students receive a sound, basic education, continue to allow the school to stay open and students to fall further behind. For these reasons, the EICS committee hearing panel recommends to the state board that it uphold the March 11, 2024 decision of the Charter School Review Board to not renew the charter of Ridgeview Charter School. Are there any questions? That's the recommendation, and you will hear, so that will come before us tomorrow for action. Our next item is, we have, Ms. Picaro, there's discussion now on the charter renewal process. And Mr. Finn's joining her. Welcome.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well, good to be back.
Good to have you.
Good morning again, Chair Davis, Vice Chair Duncan. I want to go off script if I may, and I don't want to delay you this morning, but I want to thank Chair Davis for your comments this morning when you opened the meeting. I think everybody in this room shares a common goal, which is to make sure that in North Carolina we have high-quality public schools. And I think there's not a person who's sitting in front of me or sitting behind me or standing next to me who doesn't share that and understand that it's absolutely critical for strong public schools. It's required for our state. Our state is required for our nation to be prosperous. And so just want to thank you for your comments. And it struck me as I drove in this morning, I lead a public charter school not too far from here, and I drive by it, well, I'm there every day, but I drove by it this morning, and I don't know, I realized I had left my notes in my office, so I swung by the school. And sometimes I think that when you're in those chairs, I'll be in one of those chairs next Monday morning, or you're in this building and you're doing the work day in, day out to support our students, to support our teachers. Sometimes you don't get to see that, the benefits of your work firsthand. Often the work that we're doing have much longer term results than what you get to see. And sometimes that can be, let's be honest, sometimes that can be frustrating, right? And kind of like, yeah, you're putting all these hours and work in, and am I making a difference? And I think there was a reason that my truck turned left into my school parking lot this morning, that I had left my stuff at my office last night, because as soon as I got to the school this morning, kids were getting out of their carpool line, and a young girl came up to me and she said, Mr. Fred, she gave me a big hug. She said, Mr. Fred, I missed you over spring break. I am so happy to be back. And that's why we do what we do. And I know that you do that. I know you have that commitment in your heart to improve education opportunities for all of our students across the state. So just thank you for that. And allow me to go ad lib there a little bit, but I think your comments this morning, Chair Davis, kind of brought all of that together for me this morning. So Ms. Picaro is going to walk you through the renewal guidelines that the Charter School Review Board has unanimously reviewed and approved, and hoping for your adoption as well. We recognize that the renewal process has been something that's not just been something we've discussed for the last few weeks or even the last few months. I really stand here this morning, it's been almost a year. I go back to when the legislature changed the charter school review or advisory board to the review board. And after that happened, one of the very first meetings I had was with Vice Chair Duncan and Chair Davis and Vice Chair of the Charter School Review Board, John Eldridge, who couldn't be here today. And we came together, and I felt then, as I feel now, I think we share a common goal, which is to ensure high-quality public schools, and includes high-quality charter schools in the state of North Carolina. And I think that the renewal process is part of that work that we have to do to make sure that we have really strong guidelines and really strong processes in place and oversight of the process for renewal. And I just appreciate all the work that's went into this. We committed on that day that we met for the very first time that you know, we understood that we probably have differing opinions on certain things around charter schools or just in education in general. But we committed to each other that we were going to have open lines of communication. And I stand here today and feel like that we've accomplished that, and I hope that many on the state board feel the same way. You know, we found it was easy to find areas of consensus, right? It was more challenging to work through areas where maybe we had a different viewpoint. But we committed to doing that work, and that includes the work with Mr. Blackburn and Ms. Kamnitz as well from the committee's work, to land to a point where we feel this morning that we have stronger renewal guidelines that we're excited about in terms of implementing for the next round of charter school renewals. And I think that equally important in that was to hear the voices, Ms. Beccaro and her staff as well, because they're the ones sort of on the front lines, right? They're the ones who are directly interacting with the schools that are in the renewal process. And we had learned a lot from what they were seeing in terms of what was working well and maybe some of the areas of the renewal process that needed to be improved. So just, again, before we launched into the actual, what were the exact changes or things that stayed the same, just acknowledge all of the hard work and Mr. Fafaria as well for keeping us on path to get to the point where we feel really good about the renewal guidelines that we have this morning. So with that, I'm going to let Ms. Beccaro kind of walk through what the new guidelines, how they read and how they're different.
All right, good morning again. As Mr. Friend said, this has been a collaborative effort for nearly a year. We started the discussion in May 2023 with the charter schools, at the time, the Charter Schools Advisory Board, with staff. There have been many meetings between OCS with state board staff and between the different boards. So what I'm going to do now, you'll find the proposed policy, Charter 007, posted on eBoard. I'm going to walk through each part of it to kind of explain any changes and any updates to the language, and really where we see any impact from that. So the first part of the policy is simply the process for renewal. This has simply been updated for language purposes. So for example, we've changed Charter Schools Advisory Board to Charter Schools Review Board. There's no substantive process changes in this section. It simply is updated to reflect accurate language. I do want to point out that materials have always been available. The renewal process, as pretty much everything we do as a state office, is public record. So none of these materials, some of the wording has changed. There used to be a word portfolio. Now we use the word materials. Regardless, these materials have always been public. They've always been posted on eBoard for the Charter Schools Advisory Board when it was that board, and when we brought it to the state board, to state board. In addition, it clearly states that the recommendations of the Office of Charter Schools are non-binding opinions. So our office does not, as you know, vote on a renewal term. We often have to explain this to schools. We are simply making a recommendation based on the data that we have in front of us. The next section, Section 1, Office of Charter Schools Actions. This used to be a timeline, which really was not always accurate. It really wasn't necessary to have a timeline of that sort in a policy. So what we have done now is basically taken what was in the timeline and made a list of all of the actions that our office undertakes, including communicating, renewal fees, training and support, conducting and scheduling all the material or all the meetings and the materials that take place within DPI divisions or among DPI divisions. On the next slide, you'll just see the continued kind of actions. All of our site visits that take place are conducted by OCS staff. We provide summaries and feedback from all of those visits. We schedule interviews with all of the review boards and all of the schools, and then, of course, any voting and actions related to that. Section 2 is called the Department of Public Instruction Portfolio. So this used to be called the Renewals Report. That language was not really accurate to what we produced as a department. So essentially, we've just updated the language. There's nothing substantively different in terms of what we are actually collecting, but the language is clearer and more accurate. In this section, there's a chart which clearly states the sorts of documentation and the sources we would review for a renewal. This is not limiting. We might review other things, but it gives a very good kind of overview for stakeholders, including the public and including the schools that we work with. It used to only include financial governance and accountability. We've updated it to be more in line with what we are actually reviewing. So we've added academics and operations because the Office of Charter Schools does do site visits. If it's a low-performing school, there will be low-performing visits, in-class observations, those sort of things. And then just updated some of the language regarding the office names and sources of information for financial governance and accountability purposes. Section 2 is just continuing the information about what is gathered by the Office of Charter Schools and by DPI staff. So the quarterly compliance meetings you'll see listed here, those have been taking place. They were not previously in the policy, as the policy has not been updated for, I believe, close to 5 years. But this is something that has occurred for several years now, and essentially it brings together staff from the different divisions within DPI, groups like federal programs or exceptional children, and meet to discuss any current or pending corrective actions or noncompliance matters that we need to be aware of. And then there's an additional language here that is describing the role of school business. So it states that school business will evaluate all renewal schools for financial warnings and concerns and audit findings, reviewing at least the immediately 3 preceding years, and report those findings to the board, the Charter Schools Review Board, prior to renewal voting. So this is in line with what has taken place historically during the renewal process. We asked that school business present to the charter board on the last 3 years of a school's financial status. So if there's any audit findings or if they have any type of financial noncompliance warning or status. And then we go into the guidelines. So the guidelines are essentially used to make renewal recommendations. Our office uses these to look at the data that we have in front of us, primarily academic data, and make a recommendation to the Charter Review Board. And then, of course, the Charter Review Board uses those guidelines to make their, to discuss and to vote after the entire process of interviews and presentations has taken place. There have been some clarification to language. So I don't believe there was previously a definition of compliance issues, but it just simply gives some information to stakeholders that compliance issues can include, but are not limited to, anything that falls under exceptional children, federal programs, beginning teacher support program, child nutrition, school business, and accountability. Comparability, that definition of comparable proficiency score no less than 5 points has not changed from the current policy, and that is in on the books. And then we've added, there's been added language, adding clarification regarding how to determine if a charter school serves a certain targeted subgroup. So legislation this year allows charter schools to use subgroup data when we're talking about comparability. Our office needs a way to know if a school is targeting a specific subgroup. And we don't want it to be simply something that is discussed, last minute in front of the board during a renewal vote. So we ask that it's either presented in its original application or in its self-study. The self-study is required for every renewal school. And for a school, for example, that might have been operating for 20 years and didn't have anything regarding subgroups in their original application, this allows them to bring that information and data into their current status in their self-study. There's also new language here that you'll see that clarifies what the comparable district is. So occasionally we would get schools that are unclear about this or would like to make an argument regarding a different comparability regarding, location. So this explains how the charter board may consider other factors related to a comparable LEA. The standard is that the comparable LEA is that LEA in which the school is located. So if a school is located in Wake County, then the comparable LEA is going to be Wake. However, if they want to bring in additional information into their self-study and bring it in front of the Charter Schools Review Board, there might be additional information, including proximity to districts across county lines. We do have charter schools who lie right at the line of two districts. It might be polling primarily from the district that is neighboring, or from which a majority of the school's students are enrolled. So that those kind of complexities, those nuances can be brought into the process through the self-study and through this renewal process. There's also a bullet point here regarding alternative schools. That has always been here. It has not changed. I believe we only have maybe 4 alternative schools, so this is not something that applies in most cases. All right, then we get into the specific term guidelines. So 10 years, there have been no substantial changes here. 10 years is and has been based on legislation. So there is a statute that is noted here that states that if a school meets these 3 requirements regarding financially sound audits, academic comparability, and compliance, that they shall be granted a 10-year renewal term. So if a school meets those requirements, our office obviously recommends a 10-year, and the board is required to grant that based on that legislation. 7 years, there have been some changes here. So we have no evidence of compliance issues in the past 2 years that would show a pattern of unresolved or persistent issues. That is similar to what we have now. That is the same as what we have now, as well as providing financially sound audits for the immediately preceding 2 years. The financial noncompliance, number 3 up there, has been, the bar has been heightened or increased, so to speak, and it requires now that there has been no financial noncompliance at any time in the immediately preceding 3 years. Regarding academic outcomes, the school needs to show comparability to the local LEA 2 out of 3 years, or they've met or exceeded growth in each of the immediately preceding 3 years. So this also has increased. It used to be 2 years, now 3 years. For 5 years, you'll see that it's in line with 7 years. So where it used to state that they are not currently on financial noncompliance, now they have not, it requires that they have not been in financial noncompliance in any of the immediately preceding 2 years. So it's essentially taking a longer look at their financial noncompliance status. And then academic outcomes, they need to be comparable 1 out of the last 3 years or met or exceeded 2 of the last 3 years. So these updates make it easier for our office and for a board to differentiate between 5 and 7 year. They used to be very similar, and it was always a very difficult task of trying to determine where a school fit if we didn't have very clear compliance issues or changes in the comparability. And then also the school cannot be designated as continually low performing. And then 3 years, the changes to the 3 year have been updated, all of them really, to include that if the school is not in compliance, if the school is not, for example, has compliance issues, let's say related to federal programs or EC or one of those divisions, if they have not been able to show sound audits, or if they are not comparable, so kind of those 3 buckets of compliance, finance, and academics, they need to be able to show that they have a strategic improvement plan and that they are making progress through that strategic improvement plan. So this is a way of really differentiating between a school that may be struggling academically or having some compliance issues, but we see progress And we see them actively engage the board and the school in improving, as opposed to a school that we might recommend for a non-renewal, where we are not seeing that engagement, or we are not seeing that sort of improvement in progress. And then finally, a non-renewal or assumption. We recommended one school for non-renewal this year, and these 7 listed reasons are all aligned with the termination statute that's in the Charter Schools Act, and just add some additional language to kind of expand upon it and make it a bit clearer as to what we're looking for when we are, or what we're identifying when we're making a recommendation of non-renewal. And then finally, additional factors. These have been on the renewal, the guidelines, but we do look at things. We like to have this in the policy so that schools are very well aware up front that we will be looking at things including feedback from site visits, whether a school's ADM is decreasing or increasing, which obviously impacts fiscal sustainability, and then a pattern of, if there's any pattern of either good staff retention and student retention or not. And then finally, the kind of standards that we've always had in there, which is that any renewal can be revoked at any time. So a school might get a 3-year renewal, but if we have problems down, the next year, that school can always be brought before the charter board for any type of issues that may arise. And that the charter board and the state board reserve the right to add stipulations to any renewal period. That has also been in something that has been longstanding. Last year, I think 5 of the schools that came before you received stipulations, including things like quarterly reporting to the charter board, our office doing site visits. Those are the sort of stipulations we normally see. And I know that was a lot, but if there's any questions, happy to take those now.
Before we open it up for questions, I just wanted to say a heartfelt thanks to you, Ms. Picaro, Mr. Safario, for working with us, and also thanks to Bruce and John for working with Jill and I and our committee. This has been, it's taken some time, but it's been worthwhile. I feel like we've really done great work, and many of these changes have been needed for a while. And so the document that just been presented to us is very well thought out. And so we appreciate all your hard work. And thank you, Bruce and John, for joining us in this work. So I'll open it up for questions, and then I just have one item that I want to maybe differ a little bit. So but I'll open it up for questions or for any thoughts.
Thank you, Mr.
Dr.
Black.
Oxenden.
Thank you so much, Mr. Blackburn, and thank you for the presentation this morning. I've always respected this renewal process. I know that it's tedious, and I know it's labor-intensive, but very necessary. And often the years that I've sat here around this table and have heard so many discussions about the renewal process, I've often wondered, wouldn't it be wonderful if there was some mechanism whereby this renewal process could be applied to our chronically low-performing schools, whether they are charter or, this doesn't matter, because children are children. And if they're not succeeding academically, to me, it just doesn't matter whether it's in a charter or public school. So this renewal process, I hope maybe perhaps in the future, some serious consideration will be given to such a rigorous process wherever the child attends school. My other more specific questions have to do with early in the presentation, you mentioned something about the removal of the timeline. In other words, you have steps rather than, it seems like the timeline would be beneficial. There must be some reason for removing it.
Well, we provide a timeline to each cohort, but because we always have 2 cohorts going at one time, it gets very confusing to put it in a policy. So, for example, right now we have the 25 cohort that's going, and then the 24 is wrapping up, and the 25 has started. So when we put a timeline, having 2 different cohorts, we used to have it with months, it gets very confusing for everyone.
And my final question, those schools that, for whatever reason, well, you've laid those out for those reasons, that move into the 3-year renewal.
Mhm.
Is there an, some kind of programmatic, automatic, keep an eye on those schools, like from one year to the next?
Yes, so a 3-year renewal, we have begun over the last couple of years to, we're basically analyzing the data in terms of how, like, are they getting repeat 3 years? Because this is something that's come up in front of the charter board, and it's something we want to know, right? A school that may be having challenges but is improving is much different than a school that is consistently getting 3 years and kind of just skating by. So we do have them on in our school improvement and our risk team. We have those in terms of keeping an eye. Those schools would get site visits, for example, and they would be assigned consultants through our school improvement team, which we just started this year. So we're excited to continue to kind of grow that team and hopefully see some of these 3 years move to higher level, higher terms.
Thank you, Mr. Blackburn.
Thank you, Dr. Oxman. Vice Chair.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Blackburn. And thank you for the presentation, and let me second what our friend Bruce Friend has said, that we have improved communications a great deal over the course of the last year, and I think all of us feel that and appreciate that. So I want to say that as an important component of where we are now and where we continue to hope to go, with our common goal, as stated, of we want high-quality schools for our children. Period. We want high-quality schools for all of our children. On slide 10, the guidelines for decisions, when I looked at the red line document for the policy, that language has actually been taken out and other language has been replaces it. Which, if we don't have that on slide, I can read, but I want to make sure we know which language we're actually talking about for the policy.
You want to read it to us?
Yes, the language under guidelines for decisions, the language that appears on slide 10 has been deleted. And then what's been replaced says, to receive a recommendation for renewal, the school must meet the requirements outlined in 115C-218.6. The general renewal guidelines below are used by the Charter Schools Review Board and the Office of Charter Schools to determine renewal recommendations and decisions. The Charter Schools Review Board may make an alternate renewal decision not included in the general renewal guidelines, is what the red line language says. I'm sort of, the starting point is that which language are we working on?
Mine looks the same. There in the one that the policy that's posted online, it's the one that's under the red line that's underlined, which looks the same to me on mine here. Let's see. To receive a recommendation, the school must meet the requirements. This is the one, what you see here and what I have underlined in the policy that I printed out from online is the one that is the language that the Charter Schools Board has approved. That's what went before the Charter Schools Board. So it looks like maybe there was language that had been provided. I don't know if that was from the last iteration of this policy, but that is not what was approved by the Charter Board.
All right, so thank you. For clarity, I want to make sure I understand. We are back on slide 10 is what was approved by the Charter School Review Board.
Correct.
Okay. With respect to slide 10, the language that I thought had been replaced, but from the other document that I looked at, but is not. The phraseology absent exceptional and documented circumstances seems to open up circumstance that is different now than it was before. And what I mean by that is the language is the same as it was in the statute before, but the circumstances of how that language would be applied is different, because before, the decision of the review board, if it was something that was outside the guidelines, that is absent exceptional and documented circumstances, was outside those guidelines, that would then be reviewed by the state board, which would hear the explanation for why it was being done outside those guidelines, and would then make a considered decision, which, if the record is reviewed, the vast majority of times was accepted, not every time, but the vast majority of times was accepted. So, I am continuing to include that language, or actually even the revised language, now causes me a concern in the sense that the circumstances are not, the language is the same, but the circumstances are not the same in terms of the ability of the board to enforce its policy.
Okay, so that sentence you're referring to, absent exceptional and documented circumstances, their general renewal guidelines set forth below are used to determine renewal recommendations and decisions. That was, I believe that came perhaps from, a discussion with, state board staff. That is not in the current policy. So the current policy that the state board has previously approved states that a general renewal guideline is used to determine renewal recommendations. The Charter Schools Advisory Board may make an alternative recommendation to the state board not included in the general renewal guidelines. And my understanding in discussing with the Charter Schools Review Board is that they felt that gave them more leeway to look at nuances and complexities of renewal processes as opposed to adding language which is quite limiting, absent exceptional and documented circumstances. So I think that's perhaps an area of disagreement between parties. But when we presented and received approval from the Charter Board, we used the language that is currently in the policy. We have not changed the policy language.
All right, when you make my point, honestly, which is that the circumstances, the language may be the same, the thought process may be the same, the circumstances of approval are not the same. And that is the point I'm seeking to make. So I appreciate your preferring to get that other set of language, all of which comes back to the same point. On slide 12, slide 11, I'll be very quick on this point. I have, in the past, expressed concerns about 5 points as being in the range of comparable, and believe that should be a number different than 5. And I'll be very quick and say, my thought process is, if you did a statistically satisfactory survey, depending upon your sample size, you might have a 3% plus or minus, a 5% plus or minus, even a 1% plus or minus. In this case, all the kids, 100% of the kids are taking the same test. So your plus or minus really could arguably be 0 because they're taking the same identical test. But I think some variance is appropriate. I think 5 points is too much. I've said that before. I'm just renewing. No reason for you to have to reply to that, Ashley. I'm just renewing that my feelings are the same about that. They have not changed. Finally, on slide 12, there's language, the local school administrative unit shall be assumed to be the local school administrative unit identified in the approved charter application, provided that the Charter Schools Review Board may consider additional factors such as where the charter school is physically located, its proximity to districts across county lines, and the base school district from which a majority of the school's students are enrolled. And my concern about this is I think you now have the risk of essentially shopping various districts for scores for comparability purposes. And we saw a little bit of that in the renewals last year. I'm not talking about this year's renewals, but last year's renewals, we definitely saw some of that occurring where we were being asked to look at data that was different in the charter application or data that was different than where the school was located, the county was located. And I think that lends itself to uncertainty in terms of what a proper application should be, of how the data should be applied that's being received. And that, again, without further oversight, that is a concern. So those are the 3 main things that I would point to.
If I may, I'd like to respond to that, and I
Please.
Vice Chair, I acknowledge your concern and do remember prior renewals. I think from the Charter School Review Board, it's just it's additional factors that we could look at. I'll give you an example. I'll use my own school as an example. My school is located in Wake County, but I have students who come in every day from 6 different LEAs, as far away as Moore County. But 90% of my students, if not more, are in Wake County. So I think it makes sense that when I'm up on this side asking for my next renewal, the most comparable LEA is going to be Wake County. I'm not going to shop around for, well, how do I compare to Harnett or Moore or Chatham or Durham? When the vast majority of my kids, let's be honest, are coming from this one LEA. We do have situations, though, and I can think of a school that's not very far from mine that is actually in Wake County, but it's the reverse. The vast majority of their students are not from Wake County. The vast majority of their students are from Harnett County or Johnston County. And I think by the guidelines, yes, their school is in Wake County, so we're going to look at the Wake County data. But I do think that's an example, I think, where there is a compelling interest to at least consider additional factors of how are they doing with the students. If the students were not at that school, what LEA would they actually be at? And so I think I understand what you're saying, but I do think this provides us a little bit greater flexibility and gives us another data point to look at whenever we're looking at schools who are up for renewal.
Yeah, and I would also say that it would be the office's responsibility in working with the schools and this 2-year process, starting with a self-study of really instructing those schools that you need to advocate for and bring data and bring evidence to what data you want us looking at. So rather than just picking a random county, having an idea as to, 65% of my kids are coming from this county, I might be located in this county, but let's look at comparability from those districts.
Okay, any other discussion, any other questions? If not, I do have an amendment that I would like to offer on behalf of the committee. The EICS committee is grateful for the collaborative work done with the Charter School Review Board and feels good about almost all of the draft as presented today. However, much of this process has been about preserving the status quo. When the policy currently in force was enacted, the CSRB was the CSAB and brought the recommendations to the board for final decision. As such, it made sense to allow flexibility on CSAB's part for being ultimately the decision. But the decision was still the state board. Now that decision on renewal or non-renewal is made by CSRB, and yet the state's constitution rests the only duty of overseeing public schools with this board. In order to preserve that status quo, it is the recommendation of this committee that we approve the recommendation brought to us today by CSRB in all respects except with respect to the guidance guidelines language, which we propose should read. To receive a recommendation for renewal, the school must meet the requirements outlined in 115C.218.6 and the general renewal guidelines below. Absent exceptional circumstances as documented by the CSRB, the general renewal guidelines set forth below are used to determine renewal recommendations and decisions. So that's the recommendation of the committee, and we will vote on that tomorrow. Any questions? Okay. Thank you, Dr. Archie.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Blackburn. I don't want to prolong, but would you explain that just a bit? I'm not grasping the essence of it.
So the guidelines came to us, so we want to maintain that we still have control. So constitutionally, this board is still rested with control. Although CSRB makes the
Right.
decisions, we still have ultimate control of it. The Constitution says that the State Board of Education has the right for that. So that's what we're really looking for.
So it's just your amendment or your recommendation is just giving emphasis to that fact?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
That's it.
There's no substantive stuff going on here?
So once again, I can't say enough good things about the process that, we've worked with these folks, and they've done amazing work. And also point out the chair and the vice chair have been involved, the superintendent's been involved, so we spent a lot of time on this. So this is our last recommendation, and we really need to because they're already looking at schools for next year.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, updates, regional director, structure update, Dr. Gibbs. Welcome.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, Madam Superintendent, members of the board and advisors of the board, good morning. I'm pleased to come before you today to provide an update on our regional support system, which is a thing I know just a little bit about, for sure. So I'm going to start with some introductory remarks and comments and get us going, and then you'll have a cavalcade of presenters that will follow, and I'll introduce everyone now for the sake of efficiency and time. So I'll be followed by Mr. Dixon, who will bring some remarks about some of the structures and processes put in place just in the last year or so. You'll then hear from Dr. Beth Metcalf and Stephanie DeShavi, who are doing the work as regional directors across the state and provide you some examples of the impact and the work. And then you will be hearing from Dr. Dana Ayers, the superintendent of Jackson County Public Schools, as well as Dr. Charles Faust, the superintendent of New Hanover County Schools, who will provide their perspectives on things as well. And then I'll return briefly at the end to close things up. And for your benefit, there will be a metaphor, so do not worry. So do not worry, not to disappoint. So the next slide, please. Thinking back to why we do this and why we took this work on and the vision and purpose that guide us, this is certainly a very wordy slide. If I could only keep a few words off this slide, I would keep meaningful relationships and provide support. That has driven our focus on this work since it began, and even prior to its beginning as the planning and preparation went on. And so when we think about the background, if we think about the background and what drove this work, many of you were on the board and recall that a great deal of time and effort was spent on receiving the Ernst & Young report of 2018 and the various recommendations that came as part of that, and installing and supporting a regional support structure to provide service and support across this state was one of those recommendations. Recommendation number 6 was the genesis for this kind of reemphasis. And so when we look at the timeline, it's important to, and many of you were on the board, but some board members are new since then. That report was received in 2018. A great deal of planning happened in the fall of 2018 into the spring of 2019. And then 5 years ago and 1 month, this was formally launched in March of 2019. And myself and several others were hired to help lead that work early in 2019. And so here we are 5 years in and thinking about where we are, where we've come from. And this is certainly more than about just 8 regional directors that serve in the, to lead each of those regions. It's also nearly 100 DPI staff that are deployed all across this state, regionally based staff of all sorts of offices and divisions with this agency who are doing the adaptability and the flexibility and collaboration to make things happen across the state. So I'm going to turn this over to Mr. Dixon to carry on and talk a little bit more about the structures and processes that have been instituted as of late.
Good morning. I feel a lot better than I sound. I think it's just the pollen. But I'm here just to take us a little further with the structure with respect to our regional support teams. We have a lens to regionalize, to standardize, and then to customize. Regionalize in terms of how we disseminate information that comes from the agency, applicable to all of our regions. Standardize because we know that there are different processes and mandated steps that all regions will need and our regional support teams will need to be able to support. And then customize because our regional directors ensure that the work that our regional support teams do are data-driven and based off of the unique needs of each particular region. And all the regions are certainly unique in their own right, and that's the beauty of the work. You'll see on the left side, and I won't go through all of these roles, but you'll see that these positions largely will be able to support most of the needs that a school district is going to encounter. You'll see that they are 20%, they have a 20% expectation overall, which equates to about 4 days a month. So for 4 days of the month, these permanent members that you see on the left will work under the direction of the regional director. At least one of those days is their monthly meeting, and those other 3 days could be anywhere from professional development, could be some capacity building for the team, could be some other thought partner opportunities, and whatever the work or the need calls for. On the right side, you'll see our itinerant members, and that would equate to at least one day a month. That could be that one monthly meeting, or it could be any other need on the spectrum. So we have successfully implemented and still polishing up our co-supervision model. Again, 20%, 5%, but this goal is, there is one standard goal for each RST member, and that goal is centered around how effective that regional support team member is in providing on-time, real-time, boots-on-the-ground support for districts and schools. The regional director works with each individual regional support team member to develop action steps and how they will actually carry out and execute on that goal. Questions?
Good morning again. As Mr. Dixon said, there are 8 regional directors that serve at the pleasure of the agency, representing 8 of the state board regions, of course. Those 8 regional directors are geographically based, which is unique and makes the model work, makes it efficient. And those regional directors, as Mr. Dixon said, lead those 8 regional support teams who are also geographically based. A couple of key duties of the regional director include being a conduit to senior central office staff, of course prioritizing the needs of superintendents, but also those that work closely with superintendents in the day-to-day work of our LEAs. We focus on school improvement practices that are meant to improve student achievement with each of our districts, but then also work bidirectionally from the agency. So the agency's priorities are our priorities, and the district's priorities are our priorities. And we try to really build that bridge. You'll see all 8 regional directors are listed on this slide. I think it's important to note that all 8 of them have held senior executive positions in central offices, and bring that level of expertise to this role and to the communication and work that happens with our LEA partners. Probably one of the best parts of being a regional director is the range and flexibility of the support work that we're able to provide as part of the agency. We live and work in the regions that we serve, which really allows us to have that personal touch, that one-on-one opportunity to create some flexibility in the work that we do with LEAs. And of course, all parts of the agency provide professional learning, opportunities, communication, and we're really a space for individualized and differentiated support. A couple of triggers for that individualized and differentiated support, you might imagine. Any low performing designation, of course, creates a priority point for us. District initiated request, we call those customized support. But when a district needs something in line with the agency's initiatives and also their local improvement goals, we're able to build that bridge. And then, of course, what are the regional needs? What does the data tell us that a region needs? And so we're able to initiate some of those things through our work. A couple sample regional support services are on the slide. These are important because you can see the real cross-agency collaboration that occurs for regional support to exist. So back to that alignment between what the district needs and what the agency needs, you'll see that in the samples that are listed here. For example, the first bullet, accountability and MTSS co-supervised regional support team staff have impacted 31,000 middle schoolers in the Southeast region through a multi-year, multi-cohort regional PLC initiative. That's no small feat when we look at the work the opportunities that are in middle school for all of us in the state. And there's some other examples on that page as well. But I'm happy to turn it over to Stephanie DeShavi. She's the Northwest Regional Director, so that she can give you a little deeper dive into some of the exemplar work that's going on in that part of the state.
Good morning. I am, as Beth has stated, I am excited to share a brief spotlight of one regional initiative happening in the Northwest around the Principal Ready. And a lot of this work is really made possible through a consistent membership and a cohesive regional support team, in addition to cross-agency partnerships. So the Northwest Principal Ready has awarded myself and members of the regional support team the privilege of working alongside 85 school leaders over the past 2 years. And the majority of our participants were seated principals serving in the first 3 years of their principalship. In year one, a partnership with Dr. Catherine Stickney in the Northeast region welcomed not just new principals, but aspiring principals. And in year two, a partnership with Appalachian State University welcomed principal fellow interns who were also serving in our schools. So regardless of what district these school leaders were representing, and despite previous roles in leadership roles in schools, the initial surveys and dialogue really resonated that they were navigating similar terrain, and there were clear trends of very specific shared needs. Superintendents recognized these needs, and they made a request for support. And it was as simple as, in a regional meeting, saying and explaining that they needed support for principals to do a better job of giving instructional feedback, and asked, how can you help? So customized support began with conversation. It began with me listening to superintendents, listening to accomplished veteran principals to gain insight on what was working well so we could leverage those strengths, as well as areas of need. And the resounding needs could be summarized in 2 points. One was instructional feedback, which was their original ask. However, the conversation did not end there. One of those recurring, echoing needs was strategic thinking. And I want to be clear about that. There was no interest in any type of formal plan of any sort. What they were asking for is opportunity to help principals see the bigger picture and to help them better understand how statewide initiatives are intended to work together. One superintendent simply charged me with training them to think like administrators. So that was the work. This regional opportunity was created at no additional cost to the agency, and of course at no cost to our districts or the participants. It was the co-supervision model and the agency partnerships that allowed me as regional director to efficiently access and leverage existing agency resources in order to meet the regional needs. So that's a quick summation of who we are and how we got here. So what do we do? Year one, we focused primarily on instructional leadership, which was a really big lift for initial and beginning principals. And year two, principals identified the need to target embedded elements of the job. For example, understanding teacher effectiveness data, managing the teacher observation cycle, data literacy, and so forth. Over the course of 2 years, the 9 professional development sessions worked to enhance the depth of understanding around those identified needs, and we leveraged existing agency resources to do so. Collectively, this customized support represented in the purple font on the slide provided the perfect onboard for or entry point for regional support team members as well as other agency staff to join me in supporting these principals and provide their expertise, whether that was human resource in person or customizing resources. So the goal, in summary, the goal is to take that statewide initiative, minimize the complexity, and support principals within the context of their local districts and schools to move them to action. So what does that all look like? And a quick reference to our slide there. I mentioned we started with instructional support, and we began with data literacy and data protocols. So the regional accountability coordinator from the RST joined me to co-facilitate that and started with just data literacy 101. Principals, do you understand the numbers on the page and what they're intended to represent? We then worked through a data protocol, which embedded root cause analysis, which you can see is represented by several offices across the agency, and helping principals understand you're doing this in your work in several different points. Let's make sure we have a cohesive approach moving forward and that you're not walking away with 4 or 5 different plans that you can't possibly manage. So I want to be clear that principals are doing the work. The intent of this direct-to-consumer customer service support was to move away and beyond rote mechanics of working towards compliance and really fully engaging in those desired outcomes. We're not expecting principals to be experts in all areas. We are striving to ensure that principals understand how the puzzle pieces fit together so they can think strategically and holistically about continuous improvement. And one of the protocol lenses that we coach both district leads and principals when they're engaging with statewide initiatives and goals is to make connections to what they already know and do, right? That's what we know about adult learning. How do you prioritize that work? And at some point, you have to decide when are you going to revise, revive, or replace current practice. And that's the bell ringer for the regional support team, taking that statewide initiative and helping speak the same language to help them fit those best practices into their existing context. So in closing, bringing diverse supports and voices to the conversations broadens our perspective and increases our likelihood to yield positive outcomes for all students. And so we know that our regional directors and our 8 regional support teams welcome continued opportunity to be a part of that conversation.
Good morning. Y'all look alive up there. Good morning. I am Dana Ayers. I'm the superintendent in Jackson County Public Schools, and I'm completing my 3rd year in this tenure. So I am fortunate enough to share with you some of the opportunities that Dr. Gibbs has provided for us in the far west, and we are far west, an hour beyond Asheville, that the regional support team gives to us in the far west and in Jackson County specifically. So why regional DPI support? I want to talk to you a little bit about why we were fertile ground and why we were ready to take on having, for lack of a better term, outsiders step into our school system. And it is because we have 4 schools in Jackson County that were labeled low performing at the conclusion of the 23 school year. And knowing that I'm losing sleep over this at night because I need to take care of my kids, what can we do? So Dr. Gibbs and I met over the summer and formulated this plan to have our schools that were low performing be served by the regional team. And that regional team is made up of a group of experts, and that's what I'm super proud about. They are either former principals or, as Stephanie and Beth alluded to, they have experience in a central office. So they don't come in as just another person looking for things that are wrong. They come in with content knowledge and expertise in their field. So the big part about inviting them to come into our schools, the most key piece, and you've already heard alluded to this, is relationships. I have a really strong relationships with my principals. I visit every school every week. I don't have but 9 schools, so that's not an insurmountable task. But it offers me an opportunity to sit down and have conversation with my principals on a weekly basis. So we invited this regional team. We wanted to see what was going to happen with our schools that were low performing. So what you will see on the next slide is what our purpose was. Why did Dr. Gibbs and I sit down and then he lead that team as a former Far West regional director in figuring out who was going to be best to support our schools, who could come in and work alongside our principals to identify things, content areas, strategy, instruction that was not meeting the goal that we needed it to do. And so he worked very closely with his team when he was in that role to put a principal on every team and somebody with curriculum knowledge. So each of the 4 schools that were visited by somebody with that experience. So I think it's an important piece to note is not only did the 4 low-performing schools want to have this regional team come in, not that it was an option for them. I had conversation with them about why this was going to help us. But I had another school that's never been low-performing who said, I want that, bring them in. And so it has been really profound to see the work, the intentionality that goes into walking into a school and somebody saying, oh, this is an easy thing that you could change and you could address that is going to impact student performance. So on the next slide, and I'm not going to read to you, but I wanted to point out a couple things. These are comments directly from principals in Jackson County Public Schools. And I will add that the first comment or slide is from the school that's never been a low-performing school. And so she said, I want what they're getting. Let me figure out a way to make my school an A school and make growth. And so one of the things that she said, and Dr. Gibbs was the regional director at the time, is he came in rather quickly, took him just a few minutes to assess the things that needed to be improved or changed. And one of the overall themes that we found in all of the schools is our teachers were doing the hard work. We were not allowing productive struggle to occur. We were working harder than the students were working. And I have great teachers. I have great principals. But when do we figure out a way to release that into the students' lap and let them do the harder work and have the productive struggle? And this is hard work, y'all, especially coming off COVID. We all know that. So what you saw was Dr. Gibbs walking in with some really intentional, direct, that's probably the best way I could say it, direct feedback, guilty. And by the end of this visit to this non-low performing school, within an hour, that principal and the entire leadership team, including the instructional coach and AP, they were saying what he had been saying in the first 10 minutes. They figured it out that quickly. So I'm really proud of the fact that the staff was very open. Again, they were really fertile ground because they knew that we had gaps that we needed to meet. With this principal that invited get Dr. Gibbs to come to Fairview, he also connected her to one of the team members, Julie Higdon, who now comes to that school every single month by invitation into classrooms. And that's important to realize that when Julie walks in that school, Julie is welcomed there, and Julie's expertise is acknowledged, and the strategies that she gives are being implemented. We had a I guess a 360 moment a couple weeks ago when Dr. Gibbs came along with the new regional director, which is Brandon Sutton, and one of the teachers walked up to Dr. Gibbs and said, "It's because of you that you've lit a fire under our principal, who was already stellar, but she's making us all more reflective and more intentional in what we do." So that is a true testimony to what's happening with that regional team who comes in and works alongside with that principal in a really non-threatening environment. The next slide just has a couple more comments from two schools who are considered low-performing schools. Both of these are experienced principals, 3 or more years. And one of the things that Ms. Bryson said at Scotts Creek was, my teachers initially said, well, how are they going to know how well we're doing if they're just walking in for 5 or 6 minutes? You know, how are they going to know that? Those of us in this room who've been in a classroom often, you know in 5 or 6 minutes. You probably know in 2 or 3 minutes if that is good, strong, intentional instruction happening in that class. So Ms. Bryson did a really fine job of coaching her own teaching team to say, this is why they're here, this is why they're coming. And she wrote on here, the shift began once teachers understood that it was more about student learning than it was about the teachers teaching, because they go hand in hand. And so she writes that the regional team have helped them truly embrace the idea that we're all learners and we continue to grow. And then the last principal, Principal Carrie Cowan, so Dr. Gibbs visited her last year and had some very direct comments and very intentional things to tell her, and that school made growth this past year. So it is another one of those non-low performing schools that invited the regional teams and regional directors to come out there. So I wanted you to hear that there is such value in those regional teams. They're a free resource, and that's how I look at it, because I'm a superintendent. I'm always thinking about budget. They are a free resource who is willing to come in and offer feedback and guidance, 1 or 2 small things that we can get some quick turnaround on improvement in an area. And they're at no cost to us, and they're so easily accessible. So this is our next steps. We are going to continue these quarterly visits. In fact, the directive is Before they leave this time, you make the schedule, the appointment for them to return the next time. You don't let that team walk out the door, principals, without having that date for the next visit that they come. So we want to continue that. Even when our schools are not in low performing status after this year, we want to continue having that support. But we also are having conversations with all of our principals at our monthly DLT meetings. It is not uncommon for one of our principals to say, well, you know, Julie said this, or Vicki Blankenship suggested we do this. And so our principals of all of our schools are having conversation about the feedback that they've been given from that regional team. And then what our plan is to do is analyze our data at the end of the year, correlating schools who had a regional team visit and schools who didn't, and see if there is a direct correlation in the feedback that they offered, and then share that data with our regional team. And again, a new director, Brandon Sutton. So we are proud and we are happy to have that team, and we think it is a valuable asset to us. But in the end, our goal is to make a difference for our kids. And if they are walking alongside us in this path to make a difference and make sure our kids are successful, we can't go wrong. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I am Charles Faust. I am the superintendent of New Hanover County Schools. So she just reported on things that are going on in the west. We're going to talk about the east. As far east as you can go, we go all the way to the ocean. So earlier on, I met Dr. Metcalf, probably about a month after I got to New Hanover. And New Hanover had some things that were going on when I first arrived. And I knew that during the pandemic, we also needed to look at the instructional delivery. And so quickly built a relationship with Dr. Metcalf. And so although we're here to talk about New Hanover, but I also want you to understand the work and how, I can say deliberate the work is that we do in New Hanover with the support. So I am very much an innovative thinker, and when Beth comes, she knows that she's not just going to sit. We don't just sit down and talk. It's always what's up and what's new and what's coming. And so there was a conversation that we were going to do a Zoom, and so I believe in recruiting rock stars. I believe in high-performing leaders, and I think that's the way that you get schools out of low-performing status, is that you find high-performing staff to run them. And when that happens, kids get the best. And so one of the things that we had the conversation about, my chief academic officer and I both have done turnaround work for years, and we're both successful. And you may have known she was a state superintendent, Patrice Faison, and I work together. And so we do comparative notes of who did it better, and we laugh about it. And so we got a message that there was going to be a couple coaches that wanted to work with some of our low-performing schools. And Patrice and I were sitting down talking. I was like, well, what if we were able to get the state to find us who the top-performing principals were across the state, and then had them analyze that data and look to see the schools that matched our schools. And Patrice was like, Charles, there's no way. I was like, Patrice, you have not because you ask not. And so Dr. Metcalf, Dr. Martin, and I were on the telephone, and they were sitting, they had their plan. They were going to give us retired principals, and I have no problem with retirees. At some point, I do hope to get to that level. But at this point, I was like, well, you know, I really and truly believe I've got something that we can definitely make a difference in. And so they were going to talk about their plans. Like, well, let me just show you or talk to you about our plan. And so our plan was to just that, find school leaders across the state that had been or had data that looked like ours, but they had exceeded growth. And those were the ones that we wanted to coach our principals. And so they said, well, wait a minute, let's talk about this. And so they went back at that time and talked with Dr. Oates. And so he came back and he's like, okay, Charles, talk to me a little bit more about this and what this. So then they came back and said, we think we can do this. So what we were able to do after data, the EVOS data came out, and I told them we'll hold strong. We will make sure that we're doing the coaching models, and I believe in coaching principles, Patrice, and we have individuals at our staff who I believe can do the coaching. I said, but if DPI is going to fund something, then of course we're going to keep coaching, but I want to see what the top performing school leaders across the state that look like our schools are doing, and I want to have access to that. Just a little bit of competition. And so that happened. And so we were able to sit down on telephone calls, on Zoom calls with leaders and interview those principals across the state to pair them with the best personality of the student, the principal who was leading the schools in New Hanover. And we matched it. And I think we did a phenomenal job of doing so. And in doing that, on the next slide, the great part is from the principal participants who say that the pairing of my mentor is phenomenal. Now, the unique part of this is the principal who they are paired with, New Hanover County's principal is paired with another principal within the state. They're doing the same work. And so then it goes on and they talk about, well, I think I'm learning from my mentee as much as my mentee is learning from me, because once we did put in high-performing principals in those schools. And so they're talking to another high-performing principal. So they're pushing each other. And that is something that I found to be phenomenal. And we are taking benchmarks and we're outpacing and we're doing what we need to do. And so we're looking forward to the results. We started last year before last, with 12 schools. And then this past year, 5 of those schools came off. So we're working with 7 schools. And so we are very much in tune to what's going on and providing that feedback. And those principals, one of the things that we did share with Dr. Oates is that no, we will not be poaching principals, and we had to make sure that the other superintendents knew that Charles was not going to say, I'm not going to steal your principal. I want their knowledge. I want their knowledge. And so those are things, and they can't poach our principals. And so that's part of the agreement. And I believe that's fair, is that, you know, we're really and truly, we should not be in competition of making someone else look bad. We should be saying, what are you doing in your school district that I can work in my school district? And that's actually what we're doing. And so we are honored and fortunate to have that opportunity to be able to do that. The other part was from the principal says, there's a lot of pressure at a failing school and how people are treated. This type of mentor is very important. And so you know all of the requirements that go on when you walk into a school that is failing. It's basically, and what I've shared with them, I just need for you to exceed the growth model. That's what I need for you to do. If they say that's where they are, and part of that is the relationships. If you tell a child that they can do it, and then you put a high-performing teacher in front of those students who can do it, and you change the trajectory, because I believe that the way out of poverty runs through the schoolhouse. And so this is all we're doing, is actually put into place some of the things that research says, and North Carolina has given us that opportunity to do it. So I will say thank you for that part. The other part that is really funny is when I first got there, Dr. Metcalf met, and she and I had started early. We had talked about some things. And I'm really big in analytics. I'm also big in the instructional side. And I said, Beth, first things first, we've got to do an audit on this literacy. I said, I am not pleased with this. And this was actually during the pandemic. And so we're looking at data from the year before. And so we did a full-on audit of what our literacy model looked like back in 2020, 2021. And she said, okay. She said, so what are you looking for? I said, I want to know why it's not working. What is it that we need to do in New Hanover to make literacy pinnacle? And so she said, well, I'll tell you what, I will get a team of teachers, I will get some principals. And these were all individuals that were in our district. This was not outside, because I said, I want people who know the system. And I said, no, I don't want anything. I said, you tell me afterwards, what do we need to do? And that's what she did. And I allowed her to, you know, I said it was non-biased. She shared the information. We received the information, and then we started to put together the information and how do we roll it out. And so one of the things that was most important is that 263 staff surveys were collected. This was during the pandemic. And then 85 staff members were interviewed during the pandemic. And then we also had some students who were interviewed to talk specifically about literacy. And at the end, it was so unique is because our folks have the contact with Beth. So they can text, they can email, they call, and she's part of the team. And she holds us accountable, we hold her accountable. And, you know, it's nothing for me to go from the instructional side to 2 weeks ago, I was talking about federal dollars, and she's like, okay, well, I don't, you know, I'll find out what that means. I'm calling her like, hey, are you sure about that? And he's like, well, yeah, I know she's on the instructional side, but I need this part. So it runs the gamut. And so what I will say is that we are fortunate to have a partnership. And then I will also say someone who embraces my innovation, someone who knows that, you know, I will, you know, I'll was talking on the telephone to an individual yesterday and said, you know, if you pass me the ball, I'm going to run it. And so that's the thing. I have to run this race for students. I have to run it for the employees. I have to make sure that every person that steps in that building gets a quality education. And so that's what I am appreciative of. And I just want to thank you for allowing us to, or allowing me to be innovative, and knowing that if you pass me the ball, I'm going to run it. And so at this point, I think I'm supposed to step away. I don't think I'm supposed to ask for questions, but I will. Because, you know, if you give me the ball, I'll run it.
I know, I've heard this about you. Finally, this is a long-running highway project. We talked about all the way back to 2018 and how this worked, and there's been ups and downs and movement. But you heard some of these examples, and there's more from every region of this state. Of what that impact can look like, and it takes everybody. You heard examples, people from digital teaching and learning, accountability, every corner of this agency being plugged in and often being adaptable and thinking differently and working in a different way. And so what I say to you as we face changes and transitions ahead that are inevitable, this highway is open. The road is built. It might still have some cones and some diggers and things out there working, but traffic's flowing, people can get where they need to go. And that work has been put in, and this work it's installed, it's implemented, and it's going well. And that's a collaborative effort. It involves everybody in school systems and in this department in the partnerships that have been created. So I know time is short, but I'm happy to address any questions or things that come up. And Mr. Blackburn, thank you for allowing us the time.
Thank you so much. One comment, I went to my regional superintendent's meeting a couple of weeks ago. They could have cared less whether I was there or they just wanted to know, they wanted to tell me how wonderful Stephanie is. So Stephanie answers all their questions. She's their conduit back to here, back to what's going on in Raleigh. So it was very meaningful for me to hear those great comments from the superintendents in my region and their connection to Stephanie. So thank you to all the regional directors and you too, Dr. Gibbs. Thank you very much. All right, we're running over a little bit.
Mr.
So,
Blackburn.
yes, sir.
Excuse me, sir.
Please.
Allow me to reflect on the info that I heard this morning as I was sitting and thinking about it. I'm extremely, as an educator, former educator, still an educator, with the idea of people out in the system, out in the districts. And it reminds me so much of the day of my colleague sitting to my right. She and I was talking a little about it. The regional center concept. This is exactly, it's not exactly, it's a modified version of the region, and it worked then. And apparently it is working now. We hear from those individuals who are receiving the benefits of it, and I'm just so pleased with it. That, you know, everything that's old is not outdated. Okay? Everything that's old is not really outdated. It's good. It's good stuff. And I applaud those who thought about it to move in this direction. And I see some of my other colleagues looking at me, bowing their head. They know what I'm talking about. It works. The right people in the right place. I don't know why we moved away from it. This was in the 70s or the 80s, I think. 90s? Okay, also, but, thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. It is hard work, but someone said it, putting the right people in the right place, at the right time, with the right people, again, can make a difference. And I would leave it at that. I can go on and on. I mean, I'm just amazed at the thing. Dog, this is exactly the same thing. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
And the collaboration that I'm hearing. To me, this is not creating a new box. I mean, it's not thinking outside the box, it's creating a new box. And that's where we're going with this concept. Thank you for thinking about it. I can talk about it. I was a member of that staff at that time, along with my colleagues here. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I know we're running late, but I had to say it.
I'll just take a minute and echo what Mr. Hall just said. It's almost like a deja vu. I'm sitting here listening to 4 directors and superintendent and others come forward and, in a way, I won't say plead, but look at us. This model's working. Believe in us and keep it going.
Yes.
It's deja vu. I can just remember those same kind of conversations back in the early 90s when some of our regional centers went away. But my question has more to do with where the model is today, and to what extent is it going to stay in place or look differently? Maybe you're not ready to elaborate on that, but I think things go in a state of flux, and I sense we may be headed in that direction.
No, I think it's a good question. I think that we are in a situation where we've installed a system, and several of our presenters mentioned how we have these things. We're using existing staffing and existing resources. We're capitalizing on what we already have. We're not having to ask for or obtain. We're thinking differently and being adaptable within our own resources, and then leveraging those partnerships. So I think, I certainly don't have a crystal ball and look deep into the future. But what I would say, to the point that several of you have made, that we have worked hard to implement solidly and install this system means that we can help minimize some of those challenges that come through transitions and upheaval, where we can continue to have that support flowing and have those partnerships and relationships built. So I think that the future is bright, but it's also depending on that interdependence and that collaboration. So I see that, really, this could be something to really help continue to serve and support schools and districts across the state, come what may. And so I think the future is bright. I would defer to the superintendent otherwise.
I just think it's important for this board to know that this model hinges on the co-supervision model that has been in place. That has always been the missing piece in terms of really ensuring that what you've heard described today could actually happen. And so that what makes this so difficult is that some of these folks, these 100 people who you've heard about who work for the department but who are in the field, are having to now report to 2 different people, which is a completely different way of thinking at the agency. And so I would just encourage you all to remember that in the future.
Thank you. Sorry, we're way over time. So you're now eating into your lunch, so appreciate you, Dr. Gibbs. Next item is restart model analysis, key strategies, restart model making progress. This is an update. Mr. Clifton, are you gonna make that presentation brief?
Yes, sir.
Thanks, Karen.
Good morning, everyone. Kalen Clifton, Research Analyst, OLR. Today I'm here to follow up on a request from the board that was made back in the fall about the use of flexibilities in Restart Schools, but 17 years ago, I should mention, I was a senior in Rockingham County Schools, more specifically at Dalton L. McMichael, home of the Fighting Phoenix. So to quickly move through this, I think I'm going to probably try to spend about 10 minutes. Again, just to follow up to a question posed by the board back in the fall, I'm going to try to be brief and hit the high points, but I'll be sure to take any comments, questions, or concerns, either here live or you can feel free to email me as well. So flexibilities and restart. The general idea here is I'm going to walk you through some data that details what I call restart pathways, which consist of 3 parts. We'll get to that in a second. The data that we use here stem from annual reporting. Restart schools in the fall of a year they self-report their use of flexibilities in the prior school year. So in fall of 23, that being last fall, they reported what they did in school year 23, that being fall of 22 and spring of 23. The survey data, the annual report data, consist of open responses and multiple choice. Schools first report their goals. That is an open response that I have went through and coded and categorized into either 8 or 9 categories that we'll see here in a minute. After they state their goal, they identify the flexibility that they're going to use to support that goal, as well as what that flexibility provides. Here are some of the initial questions that we're looking at with plans to execute much more analysis so that we can have more robust conclusions. Number 1, what are the goals? What kind of categories do they fall into? Number 2, what are the most utilized restart flexibilities? Number 3, what do flexibilities provide to restart schools? Provisions of flexibilities, if you will. Number 4, what are the most common restart pathways? And I'll define that here in a second. And then last but not least, which pathways are associated with higher levels of student performance? And I should first mention here before I forget, we're looking at data strictly from the 2020-23 school year with plans to incorporate data from other school years as well. Here are the summaries. My goal here is that these slides can serve as a reference for the board and for the general audience as we continue to work on this. Number 1, restart schools generally utilize 3 flexibilities to provide various resources, usually but not exclusively in support of student performance. Those 3 generally utilized flexibilities are around employment, the calendar, and the budget. In 2023, Restart Schools took a total of 81 unique pathways. Those are unique combinations of goals, flexibilities, and provisions. The most common pathways utilize budget flexibility in support of student performance by providing the 3 items you see listed there: additional staff / flexible staffing, instructional resources or programs, and professional development. And then finally, effective, which we'll define later. Effective Restart Schools use budget and employment requirement flexibilities to provide resources that may increase instructional quality in support of student performance. Next slide here. This is a large table that honestly we could probably spend all day on, again, just to serve as a reference for the board, but I will orient you to it very quickly. Down the left, we see the 3 parts of a restart pathway, beginning with a goal, moving to a flexibility, and then on to a provision. Across the top, those are multiple metrics that you can use to just look at the prevalence of flexibilities, which schools are using which ones, and so forth. So to just briefly interpret that first row there around the goal of student performance, and I'll kind of detail that in a second. 122 unique schools had at least one goal framed around student performance, for a total of 173 total performance goals. The school that had the most performance goals had 4, that's the maximum school. Per school, there were 1.42 student performance goals, so that tells us that most schools had at least 1, slightly more than 1. And then finally, 82% of Restart Schools had at least 1 student performance goal. Really briefly, I need to detail what these goals are because that was up to me as the researcher to define them. Student performance, well, first let me back up very briefly. The goals here are defined by whatever it is that the person that responded to the annual report most explicitly framed the goal around. The thing that is most evident in the written statement as this is our goal. Number 1, student performance. That's any explicit mention of either achievement or proficiency or student growth. Student conduct around student behavior. Teacher support, a big phrase that popped up there was around increasing teacher capacity to do blank. School staffing. You'll also notice here retention on the table. In later graphs, I've collapsed retention into staffing for our purpose today. Things like vacancies, general hiring. Student services, things that are provided in order to enrich the student experience in school, things like extracurriculars. School climate, general things intended to improve the overall well workings of the school. And last but definitely not least in the post-pandemic world, student attendance. Next slide, please. Julie Garber is here today, and she'll be more nimbly able to answer questions about flexibilities and provisions than I. So here, this is the kind of the first step in creating a pathway. Again, a pathway is a goal followed by flexibility and then a provision. This graph here shows us the total number of goals supported by each flexibility in the form of a horizontal bar graph. You can see the categories down the left ranging from student performance down to student attendance. These are sorted according to their prevalence, where the goal with the most flexibility support is at the top, that's student performance. The goal with the least flexibility support is at the bottom, that's student attendance. And then within each goal category, those bars are also sorted by their prevalence. So the long purple bar at the top tells us that about 150 student performance goals were supported by the purple category, which is budget. So about 150 student performance goals were somehow supported by the use of budget flexibility. The same interpretation applies throughout, but for the sake of time, we're going to keep it moving today. Be sure again to note any comments, questions, or concerns. Next slide, please. This then is a link between the goal at the very beginning, running through the flexibility all the way to the thing that it provides, also known as the provision. There is a legend at the bottom that shows you the different provisions, again sorted by prevalence according to popularity, commonality, etc. So to just interpret the first long blue bar, that tells us that about 95 student performance goals were supported by the provision of additional staff or flexible staffing. You can see here, interestingly, that the top bar, that is to say the most popular bar for each goal category, slightly varies according to what the goal is. So if you just look at the top bar in each category, then look at the legend, you can see which provisions are most popular for each goal. And I think that's very insightful as well. To the next slide, this is where we bring it full circle. Top 10 most commonly utilized pathways for Restart Schools in 2023. You can see 8 total bars, but that is because they are stacked together. You can see some bars have more than one color. They are stacked together according to the flexibility and the provision. The number to the right of the bar indicates the total length of that bar segment. So you can see that the blue bar at the top is 16. That tells us that there were 16 total pathways in which schools attempted to support student conduct by using budget flexibility to provide additional staff or flexible staffing. The purple bar to the right is the longest bar. It is the most commonly used pathway. That tells us that there were 110 total uses of the pathway that attempts to support student performance by using budget flexibility to provide additional staff / flexible staffing. Top 10, again, just in 2023. The next slide, I was tasked with reporting on what are the pathways that effective or highly performing Restart Schools take. So in order to define an effective Restart School, I looked at their growth and their achievement as captured in the school report card data, transformed or standardized those variables such that average growth within Restart Schools, so we're looking only at Restart Schools, comparing a Restart School to its counterpart Restart Schools. I transformed those so where average growth is 0, average achievement is 0. If you look on your slides, maybe you can see the intersection of these 2 dotted lines. It splits it into 4 quadrants. Schools with above average growth and above average achievement are located in the upper right-hand quadrant, emphasized by the orange dots. So those are the schools that, as compared to other Restart Schools, are making more growth and more achievement. And just as an aside here, you can see that Restart Schools that have higher levels of growth also have higher levels of achievement on average as well. So the next slide is going to be a look at the pathways of schools that meet that definition of effective. The axis at the bottom gives us the percent of schools that took that pathway at least once. These are again sorted by prevalence going down to where the most prevalent pathway is at the very top. And we see here that in 2023, the most popular pathway among Restart Schools that had higher than average growth and higher than average achievement as compared to other Restart Schools is the pathway that attempts to support student performance by using budget flexibility to provide for additional staff or flexible staffing. You can then just keep going down the line. You see a lot of the longest bars are green. That again speaks to the prevalence of the student performance goal. A secondary and tertiary goals being using budget to provide PD, using budget to provide instructional resources or programs. This goes back to, I think, the last bullet on the summary slide, where I independently come to the conclusion that these are things that schools may reasonably do to try to improve the quality of instruction in the classroom, which then can reasonably be expected to lead to increased test score-based outcomes. The next slide, very interesting slide here as well, but for the sake of time, the one thing I want to point out here is, again, recalling that I have transformed these variables such that 0 indicates average. Anything to the right of 0 is therefore above average, and anything to the left of 0 is therefore above average, or excuse me, below average, right above, left below. One thing that stood out to me here that we're going to dig into further is that the pathways that are associated with higher levels of achievement and growth, they generally start with the goal of student performance in mind. If you look down to the bottom 2 and 3rd categories, those generally are associated, again, just in this 1-year data that we have, those are generally associated with lower levels of achievement and growth, those being student conduct and school staffing. And although I would not draw any strong conclusions from this, what it suggests to me is that an explicit focus on student conduct for the sake of student conduct, or staffing for the sake of staffing, may not just trickle down into student performance. Perhaps it needs to be coupled with an explicit focus on student performance. That's a theory that we hope to test coming soon, which leads to the next slide on kind of the next steps for analysis to support policymaking. Number 1, we have several more years of data that we can add into this that will allow us to test more ideas, observe trends over time, and just apply some more rigorous methods so that we can come to confident conclusions. Number 2, the annual report also includes a lot of other data that I had just not had time to dig into at this point, such as more detailed descriptions of what they do with their provisions. So if they say that this provides us additional staff, they also tell us explicitly what type of additional staff that provides. I can then link that, and maybe we can have like a 4-tiered pathway, if you will. And then number 3, noting that Restart Schools have goals other than achievement, which in itself is interesting, I think. We can link these data to other outcomes to see if whatever that goal is, did the use of that flexibility and that provision help meet that goal? An example being, do schools with student conduct goals see improvements in student conduct? We have data on some things that may at least proxy for student conduct, so we can link that in to see if they are meeting those goals as well. With that being said, I think I'm going to open it up at this time for questions, comments, and concerns.
Thank you. I would encourage anyone, if you have any questions, Mr. Clifton, please follow up with him. It's a great presentation. Thank you so much. You always learn so much whenever you're making presentations.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Karen.
Mr. Blackburn, I
Yes.
just want you to know that I do have some questions, but I don't need to ask them right now.
Yeah, if you could.
Yep, I can do it later.
Sure. Thank you.
Thanks, Ms. Moore. All right. We have 2 discussion items. Ms. Garber, hey, Julie. So the first one is Restart Continued Authorization Review. So turn it over to Ms. Garber.
Good morning, Chair Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Superintendent Truitt, and board members. My name is Julie Garber. I am here today to bring to you the first cohort of Restart Schools to go through the continued authorization review process. Let me stop one moment and just give thanks again to Kalen. I was very grateful for his diligence in a very challenging, from my perspective, a very challenging analysis, and very much looking forward to his continued work. So thanks to him. So again, 55 schools to bring to you from cohort 1. There are 3 possible outcomes from this review process, and we're going to share with you those 3 possible outcomes. All of this, of course, is based on your policy DSTR 040, and that guides the monitoring process for our Restart Schools. The policy itself is also based on the statute that you see before you, 115C-105.37B. In that statute, it specifically asks for a procedure for removing or continuing the authorization. So that's where we get the language from, and so we use the language continued authorization review. The purpose here then is that the procedure is to determine if an LEA will continue to receive your authorization as the state board to continue to operate the Restart model for these currently approved schools that are now finishing their first monitoring cycle. So in this process, as we developed it, the schools and the districts were required to submit some information. The first was a part 1, a self-study for implementation. And this described how they currently operate, their established procedures that helps them to sustain their work. Part 2 is the school reflection on progress, and the schools document their progress. In it, they also submit what are the flexibility outcome goals, and so their trend data from the use of flexibility, if they need it, it becomes a part of their academic gain. Part 3, the district declared intent with local board approval. This is where the district describes their desire, and also the local board is, there's evidence of the local board's approval as well. Finally, we also, we, with the help of accountability, provided some data profiles for these schools. So each school received a data profile, 5 years of data that summarizes the academic gain data as well as all the sub-data within that. So the other piece of the review process is what has always been before you in the policy. It's what we've defined academic gain with these 5 components. You will see a slight change in language because legal counsel has, recently we've updated the policy and moved from recurring low performing to continually low performing. So just pointing that out to you. There are, of course, 5 components: continually low performing status, overall growth status, achievement score, subgroup growth status, and the flexibility outcome goals that are defined by the school and the district. Then we have the continued authorization workflow. And in this is the flow process that using the data is determined if they would be recommended to continue. And it's over a 5-year span, their data. So this data identifies 8 different pathways that these schools could use to demonstrate academic gain. 8 different ones, combinations of them. And in which they demonstrate their progress, including the use of flexibility, which is the final one in that column. And they work in collaboration with the school and the district, and these, on again, that very far right-hand side, they may use data such as teacher retention, chronic absenteeism. They might have identified teacher capacity, right? Improve student discipline. So any of those may also be included in this overall picture of what is academic gain. So then, as a result of the entire process, as I mentioned, there are 3 possible outcomes. And I will note for you that as we developed policy, there were 2 years as well of focus group and stakeholder feedback. I'll just remind you of that process. So 3 possible outcomes. For the district would be actually to receive continued authorization, or the district would be required to reapply for that continued authorization, or the district may choose to submit an exit application. So here we have it, 55 schools from these cohort 1. This is across 18 districts. And just for historical purposes, I'll remind you that these schools began implementing in either 16-17 or 17-18. They were originally scheduled for the review in 21-22. Of course, we know the impact of COVID, and you all provided them a buffer of 2 years due to the lack of accountability data, so they had a 2-year delay, and now we're in that updated review year, completed 23-24, and it needs to be completed by the fiscal year, by the end of this fiscal year. So, the first outcome is, as I mentioned, recommended to continue. Based on policy, this is when, if a school is no longer recurring low performing, or now we say continually low performing, and the growth status meets or exceeds, the state board may continue the LEA's authorization. In addition, DPI may reduce the LEA's reporting obligation so long as the school does not regress. The other situation is in which the school is demonstrating academic gain, and again, they may continue. We have 40 schools who are being recommended to continue. And 2 of those schools were recommended. However, the district has selected to submit an exit application. So the next 2 slides provide you the list of all those 42 schools. I will keep moving for the sake of time and move on to the second outcome. The second outcome, of course, then, is to reapply to continue. And according to policy, then, this is when a school there has been no progress in academic gain, and in this case for these schools over 6 years in the model. This is when the school has no growth status, has not met growth, and in addition, the achievement score is negative, meaning they've gone backwards in their achievement since beginning. In this case, the policy states the LEA must submit a new restart application with a new plan for improvement and shall partner with DPI for intensive support until demonstrating academic gain. There are 13 schools that must reapply in this scenario. The 13 schools before you are on this slide. I will point out to you there is one school that is from Onslow, and that district has not elected to reapply. And so with your approval, that would automatically, that school would no longer receive authorization. Okay? For these schools, the question before us is, if they reapply, what will be different? And considering that they, of course, depending on your guidance and your purview, if they were given another 5 years, what would be different? In working with the EICS committee, there were 4 criteria that were requested in the applications. So these applications. The applications were received from Gaston, Halifax, Union, Warren, and Wayne. The requested information and criteria in the applications were that a superintendent-appointed district restart contact be appointed that had executive-level decision-making authority and influence. We have district restart contacts in every district. They don't always, depending on their role, depending on the size of the district, they don't always have this particular criteria in place. So again, requesting a system of prioritized support from the district to these specific schools. Leadership support, as we've heard before, principal support, very important. Leadership support provided to the principal. And then, of course, a revised plan for improved student outcomes. What would be different about the way they use their flexibilities? What's going to be different in this plan? So those were the 4 criteria. We assembled a committee, and in this committee, they reviewed the applications. And looking for those 4 criteria, we have before you the information, again, facts information for you from the review of the committee and consensus. In this case, you have the 4 criteria across the top. On the right-hand side, whether or not they're recommended to continue or recommended to be approved their application, and then on the left-hand side, they're the districts. So as you can see in this situation, we have Union and Warren being recommended to continue, recommended to receive their application and approve their application, while Gaston, Halifax, and Wayne were not recommended. That, again, the yes there that you see before you is if the criteria was evident in the application. The no being no, the committee did not come to consensus if the criteria was evident in the application. So those are the recommendations. Of course, this is our intent is to bring you the information based on the requested criteria, and of course it is always up to your decision making and purview as you discuss all of the factors that you have in front of you. The final and third possible outcome is an exit application. This is according to policy at the end of the monitoring cycle. If the LEA is no longer desiring to use the model to continue to reform the school, they have demonstrated academic gain, the LEA can request an exit application. So we have 2 of those coming before you that you have in your information. Those are coming from Alamance as well as Onslow for these 2 particular schools. Again, they reached academic gain, but the district is electing to exit. So in the exit application that you have, the exit application includes the district's rationale as well as they were also asked to provide a prioritized plan to support the school to sustain and then, of course, increase positive student outcomes. So, in summary for you, we know that this, again, all of this information is based on policy, based on the data that we have from the schools, and then based on needing to specifically look at the applications that were coming in to reapply to continue, and based on that consensus from the committee. So in summary, we have the recommendations for you, and again, I'll reiterate, our intent is to bring you the facts based on policy, the data, potential recommendations for you to consider, but as well, you all have many factors to consider in this process. I will reiterate, it is a new process, and so the recommendations would be to approve the continued authorization for the 40 restart schools, approve the committee recommendations for the 13 to reapply, and then approve the exit applications for the 2 submitting to remove the authorization. And with that, I will pause and ask for any possible questions.
Ms. Campbell?
Thank you. As always, that was a very clear and concise report and recommendation, so appreciate that, Dr. Garber. I'm looking at the chart. These are the chart of the reapply to continue authorization schools. And first, it appears that one no out of the 4 was sufficient to result in a recommendation not to reauthorize.
That's correct. Knowing that the 4 criteria were requested of us, we took that point of view that those were the 4 criteria being asked, and thus, if they weren't all there, they were not recommended.
So I guess I would like to lift up to my colleagues an email that we all received last week, I think, from the superintendent of Wayne County Schools, who is quite recent. I think he began 7 or 8 months ago. I have worked with him in the past, and I received a phone call from him, so we had a conversation as well. And in Wayne County, the particular no was about support of the principal, and there has been quite a bit of movement, according to him, on that in that one high school. So I'd recommend to all of you to take a look at that letter. And personally, for me, I think that next month I would consider granting them the continuation of restart.
Dr. Officer?
Yes, and I want to reiterate and join you on that point. I was gonna ask the same question. Does one no mean no?
Yep.
Obviously it does. But my other question would be, so there's no weighting given to the criterion, each criterion? Is that
There was
right?
no weight, and it was simply is it evident? Is it evident in the application?
I feel strongly that this particular school leader is going to have a major positive impact on the success of that school system. So I join my colleague across from me, Ms. Kamnitz, to say I would give it serious consideration.
Mr. Blackburn,
Yes.
just quickly, if I could, and I support my 2 colleagues in your discussion about Wayne County's request. My question will be, or is, if a superintendent was making administrative moves in order to comply with the strong leadership support provided to the principal through internal support in the district or external, if the superintendent was in the process or has made some administrative moves to satisfy that, would that not be acceptable? I'm just saying. But I certainly think that this would need to be looked at also next month. I support what you say. Oh, I'm sorry.
Superintendent?
Shut up.
And if I could just piggyback off of Mr. Hall's comments, I think that in addition to making changes, there would need to, I would hope that a local superintendent would lay out for the board the very specific actions that have been taken and possibly even some evidence that those actions have borne fruit,
Fair
as
enough.
is the case with Wayne County.
Fair enough. Good. Yeah. Mr. Chair.
So, of the districts on this slide we've that have not recommended. We've heard from Wayne.
Yes, sir.
Have we heard from Gaston or Halifax?
I personally made phone calls to let them know this information before it went public. But apart from that, as far as similar to a letter, Gaston reached out via email and did ask if they could amend, right, and submit, similar to what you were referring to, I believe. And so they did reach out and ask if they could amend. My answer at this point was the information has been given to the board, and the board has their purview to decide and take next steps.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're signaling by this discussion that we're open to further information from those districts, at least under consideration.
This is a discussion issue, so yes. Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Ms. Arbor.
Okay.
Where you stay?
I will stay right here.
Stay right there. And our next item is submission of new restart applications.
Yes, sir. So, we have for you 23 applications that have been submitted. As we begin, we make a connection with your strategic goal, but I'll move forward and remind you that we currently have 158 restart schools across the state. They are noted by cohort when they begin implementation, and I'll make a connection with our previous conversation. They're identified by cohort because they're going through that monitoring cycle. So, we have first from Cleveland. Before I start with Cleveland, I want to just orient you to this slide. The eligibility for restart is, of course, what has previously been called recurring low performing, now called continually low performing. On the slide, you also see their implementation year. And so for the majority of these schools and districts except for one, they are asking for implementation in this upcoming school year. I'll point out the other one. So when we receive the applications, we review whether or not they're eligible. Then the requested flexibilities, just to confirm if they are indeed charter-like flexibilities and based on statute, and then reviewing that the district has taken their responsibility to review the financial implications as well. So for your discussion, we have Cleveland submitting 2 restart applications. They currently have 1 restart school, and if approved, they would have 3 after that. They do have 1 current school who's in cohort 1, and they have been recommended to continue. We move to Halifax, and Halifax is submitting 4 restart applications, and for implementing this upcoming school year. Did I skip? I think I skipped. I apologize. Gaston. I went right past it. Gaston, 4 restart applications. They currently have 4. And so if they were all approved, there would be 10, they currently have 6 schools. If they were all approved, they would have 10 restart schools in total. The current 6 schools are in cohort 1, and 3 of those schools must reapply to continue. Now Halifax. Halifax currently has 4 restart schools. They are asking for 4 applications. If approved, they would have 8. The current 4 schools are in cohort 1, and 3 of those schools must reapply to continue. In Moore County has 3 restart schools, and if approved, they would have now a total of 4. In Sampson County, they currently have no previous restart schools, so this would be a new journey for them, and they are submitting 3 restart applications. Wake County Public Schools, they are submitting 6 restart applications. They currently have 34 restart schools, and if approved by you, they would have 40 in total. 2 of the schools are in cohort 1, and those 2 schools have been recommended to continue. And finally, we have Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools. They currently have 5 schools, and if approved, they would have a total of 8 with these 3 applications. They do have 1 school in cohort 1 that has been recommended to continue. So in total, if approved, there would now be 181 restart schools. I would remind you that this total number also is, of course, dependent on your other votes in the upcoming months. So a potential total of 181.
Any questions? Ms. Gaines?
I would just point out that in committee, when we discussed this, there's we just talked about Gaston and Halifax having some schools that were not recommended for reauthorization, and yet they're requesting more. So I don't know, do you have any comment on that, Dr. Garber, or?
We have never, so when we bring you restart applications, we have never really brought a recommendation to you, and so we follow that precedent. We have the facts in front of you, and so you have all the information.
It's on us.
It's on you.
Mr. Hall, did you have a question? No, sir.
Wait, just one quick question. At what point or where does it enter into the discussion, and you may not have an answer to this, and that may be something we seek at another time. Does a district consider a district designation versus the number of schools that they may, depending on how many they may have be requesting, how many are already there, a district designation versus a school-by-school designation?
A very important question, and I think knowing that there is a renewal school district, that would be the, I'm often asked, is there a restart district? And there is nothing of a restart district. It is called a renewal district, and the statute is very specific about what the requirements are for that. So it certainly does offer more opportunity for discussion.
So then I would maybe fine-tune my question a little bit. Are any of the districts that are requesting additional restart schools eligible for a renewal district designation?
I do not know that. I would have
You
to.
have a nodding no behind you, but.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would agree with that, but I would prefer the no come from behind me.
This is good to know. Thank you. Thank you.
Chair Davis?
So 2 points, building off Ms. Moore's comments. I know we have had discussion with certain legislators about considering revising the criteria around restart and renewal, in that there are many schools, and in fact, it was an example mentioned previously in a previous presentation this morning about a principal that said, well, I'm not low performing, but I still want to improve. Why can't we make those opportunities available to principals and district leaders? Why wait until a school is maybe recurring low performing before we give them the ability to do some innovative and creative things? So that's one comment. The second is, in terms of the analysis that has been provided today around the performance of different elements of the restart model, combined with the item around schools that are seeking reauthorization, I would find it helpful if we could combine those two elements. In other words, give us insight into which of the renewal schools, how are they performing on the chart that we just observed? Which quadrant are they in, and what are they doing that is working, or what are the ones, what's happening that maybe they're not performing as well as we need them to? And so how are they going to use during this next renewal cycle? What strategies will they use to raise their performance? I mean, it's all about raising student academic achievement.
Yes.
And so I think we could zero in on that a little more, perhaps, in the next round.
Absolutely.
Okay. Yes.
Yes.
Any other?
I think that's really, now that we have some data that shows what's working and what's not, we have the ability to say to those districts, here's how you need to invest that flexibility. If we continue to give you the flexibility.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Ms. Garber, always for your
Thank you.
great reporting and your great work. We appreciate you a great deal.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, that concludes my committee report.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Blackburn. We're going to adjourn now for lunch, and we'll reconvene at 1 p.m. 1 p.m.